please. Well, having just heard that passage from the Gospel of Matthew, I would like to invite you to join me in boarding an imaginary time machine. And when we go to set the coordinates of this time machine, here are the parameters. Let's set the year to maybe 85 AD. Could be 80 or 90, because that is about when scholars think the Gospel of Matthew was written. And then in terms of place, let's set the coordinates of the imaginary time machine to the city of Antioch, because New Testament scholars think that Antioch is the most probable location for where the Gospel of Matthew was written. And if it wasn't written in Antioch, it was written in a city of similar demographics. So let's head to Antioch in the year 85. Antioch was a major city in the eastern part of the Roman Empire, situated near the water at the northeast corner of the Mediterranean Sea. The modern Turkish city of Antakya is very close to where Antioch used to be. And like many Roman cities, Antioch had a population of people with many ethnic and cultural and linguistic backgrounds, very diverse. And there was a community of Christians there in Antioch that very likely was itself very diverse in many ways. Some of the members of that church had been born and grew up in Antioch. Some had come from elsewhere. Some probably were refugees or the children of refugees. Perhaps some of them were descendants or were themselves members of churches who had had to depart Jerusalem during waves of persecution or when the Roman army sacked Jerusalem in the year 70. And so there was a diversity of where the members of the church came from. There was diversity in other ways, too. Some of the members of the church were Jews who had decided to follow Jesus. Other members were not Jewish, but had also decided to follow Jesus. There were probably several different languages spoken by people in the church. And so it is very likely, according to evidence from the gospel and just knowing human nature, that conflict arose among the members of the church. There could have been many causes. There could have been tension about who should be the leaders of the church, how much should non-Jews who join the church be expected to adopt Jewish customs. Could be anything that caused the conflict, probably multiple things. And so after a while, it seems likely, given today's parable, that somebody in the church, one of the church leaders, thought to themselves, you know what? I have an idea for how we can address the conflict in our church. What if we took the people who disagree with us and threw them out of the church? That would solve the problem, right? Then everybody in the church would agree with us. We would be following the right way of being Christian, because, of course, I have the right way and not those other people. That would be great. Or if they lacked the power to kick people out of the church, they might have thought, let me leave and start my own church. That'd be better. This, of course, if this happened, this would not be the first time churches have split along similar lines of conflict. It's a pretty familiar pattern we know from church history. And so this is the moment when a leader of the church in Antioch, or maybe multiple leaders, decided perhaps to write what we now know as the Gospel of Matthew, assembling various oral and written sources together to make the book that we have today. And the writer of the Gospel of Matthew specifically decided to include the parable we just heard. It doesn't appear in any of our other Gospels. A parable that the writer of the Gospel had maybe heard that Jesus had said, and then the writer of the Gospel thought, the people at this church need to hear this. Let's put it in. And I bet that the parable would have sounded familiar to the people in the church, though not comforting, right? Parables are not meant to be comfortable, right? These days, when we say the word parable, we tend to mean kind of a story with a moral to it. But in a way, I think we have narrowed the definition of parable, made it less powerful. The Greek etymology of the word parable literally means to throw beside, which suggests that hearing a parable is not so much like curling up with a good book, but like being jolted by some words that have been thrown beside you, jumbling up your worldview a bit, making you think. And that's what this parable does. So y'all just heard it, right? In the parable, a landowner plants a bunch of seeds for wheat, but then some nefarious person comes in and sows weeds among the wheat. Hard to tell them apart. And so when the plants grow, lo and behold, there's weeds alongside the wheat. And the workers in the fields are disturbed. And they say to the landowner, hey, this is not good. How about we go and remove all the weeds, so then the wheat will be able to be fine? Which sounds a lot like what might have been going on in the church in Antioch. If we just throw the people who disagree with us out, then we'll have a good church. But you remember what the landowner says in the parable. The landowner says, well, if you remove the weeds, you'll hurt the whole field. It's going to be bad. So let everything grow, and we will sort this out at harvest time. Then we'll sort the weeds from the wheat. It's a parable, I think, that suggests that we humans don't really have the capacity to too carefully sort out who is good and who is bad. We know from history many examples of churches and political states that have decided to try to cleanse themselves of troublesome folks, and the results have been at the very least harmful and at the very worst extremely tragic. And so God says, don't worry about that. Don't need to be in charge of that. Just be in community. Show love to one another. And so when I hear that, I think, well, I like that we're not trying to throw people out of the church. That seems good. But it's still, when I first hear that parable, I think to myself, well, that still sounds kind of awkward and worrisome to always be thinking of, am I a weed or am I a wheat? A spring of wheat. Or is my neighbor weed or a wheat? That doesn't sound any kind of fun at all and not good for community. And I think this is where thinking back to Gia's sermon from last week makes a difference. She was preaching about another parable from the Gospel of Matthew that also is about planting seeds. And the parable she preached about last week featured a gardener, a sower, flinging seed all over the place, whether it landed on good soil or not. And Gia reminded us that it's not very healthy to worry about whether we're a weed or whether we're good soil or bad soil, but just to realize that God, the sower, flings seeds of grace upon us all. So I don't think we need to worry about whether we're a weed or whether we are wheat. I think we probably all have some weed and wheat in all of us anyhow. But rather, to just get on with the business of loving one another as God calls us to do. I do think that sometimes, if you've given a good effort in a relationship, sometimes it can be healthy to end it. Could even be healthy to leave one church if you realize that your values are diametrically opposed to that church's values. That's where I think the prayer that says, God, can you help this person because I need to have space away from them, can be a good one. But by and large, I think that this is a parable inviting us to see that God's call is for us to be a part of communities not where everybody is alike and exactly aligned, but in communities like the church at Antioch, where there's diversity of perspective, of ethnicity, of language, of culture. An invitation to see conflict not as an inherent problem, but as a chance for growth within the community, and an invitation to love one another. I don't know exactly what happened with the church in Antioch, but we do know that Antioch was a thriving center of the early church. So maybe that church did a good job of hearing what the gospel said. And so can we too, once we take our imaginary time machine back to Worthington on July 19th, right? 2026. Amen.